excuse me, hello again. Great to be back on stage again, and great to be joined by a brilliant panel. We've had some excellent sessions so far, very buy-side focused, obviously. This particular session, we're joined by some of the supply side, as well as to get a balanced view, the trade desk as well. So looking forward to discuss a little bit more about the state of the nation data, and obviously from some of our key guests again today. Please do feel free to ask questions for this particular session. You can see the Slido QR code on screen, and we'll hopefully make some time later to get to those if we can. So first and foremost, thank you, gents, for joining today. If you could just introduce yourself first and foremost, your role, the company you work for, that would be fantastic. And we'll start with Dom, please.
Hey, thank you, Gavin. Hi, everyone. I am Dom Kozak, currently Director of Programmatic for JCDecaux in the Middle East. My background, I've been with JCDecaux Group for about 14 years, quite a long time, I'm sure you can agree. And probably about 18 months ago, I moved from the UK, where I was lucky enough to be working on programmatic out of home in the very first market for JCDecaux in the UK. Moved out here to set up this. You see my lovely branded background, JCDecaux Play Plus. For that, just really programmatic digital out of home with JCDecaux on our premium screens across the Middle East. There was a question earlier, I think, about out-of-home supply programmatically in Dubai. And yes, we cover Dubai, we cover the UAE, we cover Bahrain, we cover Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman. So that's me.
Thank you, Dom. Thanks for joining today. Eamon?
Hi, my name's Eamon. I don't know if I can follow up with such a interesting intro that we just got from Dom, but my name's Eamon Sallam. I'm the co-founder and COO at Elevision. I've been lucky enough to kind of, lead the initiative of our company into programmatic. We started in about 2019. We brought our network up or got it online programmatically. We operate here in Dubai primarily, as well as Abu Dhabi, and then more recently in London as well. We specialize in like residential and office media. And yeah, I mean, we've been kind of really committed to the programmatic ecosystem and the channel for a few years now, and we like to think that we've been on the leading edge of it here in the region. So I'm thankful to be invited on the panel.
Brilliant, thanks for joining us, Eamon. And finally, Fash.
Hi, I'm Fash. I'm based in Dubai. Been in ad tech for about 17 years. Spent around half of that in London and the rest in Dubai. I actually only joined Trade Desk about 3 months ago. Trade Desk is the largest independent global omni-channel DSP. And I look after partnerships across Middle East, Africa, and Turkey. So that covers all of our supply partners and data partners across all digital channels, including, of course, programmatic digital out of home. Very happy to be here with you guys, and thank you for having me.
Brilliant, thank you, gents. So we've got a really interesting dynamic on this panel. Obviously, JCDecaux operates at scale across the region. Elevision have a focused presence, certainly in the UAE and other markets, as Eamon said. And then obviously the trade desk perspective from that buy side, and obviously a big brand in the region. The first question really I've got for you all, please, is that the data tells us that the market's growing really, really quickly. 34% of all campaigns over the last 18 months had programmatic digital out of home as part of. And if we look at the forecast, it's expected to jump to around 46% in the next 18 months. So maybe a reality check, gents. Is that what you see? And is that growth in line with what you expect? And Eamon, maybe we can start with you first, please.
I mean, from a reality check perspective, we're not quite there yet. I was surprised to see that number at 34%. I'd be interested to see like what's the kind of the denominator of that to get to 34%. But we're sitting around the 10% mark. And I think that we probably have one of the higher rates in the region from a programmatic ratio. And we're sitting around 10%. Obviously, it gives us optimism that there's a lot of upside, a lot of potential still, but we're not quite seeing those figures yet from our side.
Thank you, Dom.
Yeah, I guess a similar kind of opinion to Eamon with a bit of a reality check. I think one of the important things to think about with this stat though is the nature of people surveyed by MTM. I've been lucky enough to kind of be well, I think be very involved in receiving the state of the nation information over the years. I know that one of the things that the survey population are people who are active in this channel, so that probably skews the number a little bit. I think anecdotally, locally, it very much exists in pockets, and in reality, I think there's two races being run, if you like. There's a kind of international programmatic out-of-home race where we're seeing investment coming into the region from places like the UK, US, China, India, etc. And that number probably feels about right there. Locally, maybe not so much. I think kind of local to local transactions, it is still very, very early days for sure. I mean, we only launched in April last year from a programmatic out of home perspective. But I think what is really interesting is the trend, right? And the trend is going in kind of one direction. And I'm talking particularly for that kind of local to local, so Middle East to Middle East. Kind of programmatic out-of-home transaction. So if we take the first 2 months of 2026 and we look just at those local transactions, in terms of brand count, we saw in those 2 months the same number of brands as we saw in the whole year last year. So to me, that says we are at this kind of inflection point of acceleration, but the base is lower than this stat represents, I would say, unless someone else out there is doing a lot more business than we are. But I don't think so. Fash would probably know.
I think Fash will know because we've got two interesting supply side points there saying, not sure about the data point. What's your point of view, Fash?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's actually quite interesting to hear that. And I think from our point of view, to be honest with you, the last couple of years, and as I said, I've been here for 3 months, but I've looked into the data. And the last couple of years, out of home has really played a huge part of the driving force for us. So it's definitely one of the bigger channels for us, and it sits very closely alongside CTV. And I think given our relationship and where we sit in the ecosystem, where we are obviously plugged into all suppliers in the region, and we have incredible reach when it comes to the screens within the region, I would probably lean more towards what Dom was saying in the sense that we're not far off that 30%. And I think that the trend is probably more important than the number in this scenario, in the sense that it shows really strong intent, which is exactly what we all know. And, it kind of like formalizes that from data point of view. But I do think to kind of touch on how we get to that 46% is actually, I think Yasmin touched on this on the previous panel as well, is there are certain, pillars that need to be addressed that we're all aware of, whether that's around infrastructure, measurement, or purely like supply fragmentation, which need to be addressed for us to be able to make that 46% achievable.
Thank you. It sounds like everyone's in agreement the trend is really healthy and obviously the baseline is strong. But it's really interesting data, I think, that we've seen from this report. So thanks for your comments. If we look at the region as a whole, and maybe I can come to you first, Dom, is maturity happening at the same pace across the whole region? Or are there specific countries within the region that are perhaps championing or driving the trend as a whole? What's your thoughts on that, please?
Look, very short answer, no. Again, it varied. The UAE is definitely the most established, right? It is a lot of the media industry, if you like, industry media is kind of centered here. A lot of the buyers come out of Dubai and Abu Dhabi. I'm sure that's the most established market, if you like, in terms of size. If you look at the kind of fastest growing though, from what we can see, it's definitely Saudi. The challenge with Saudi in that the out-of-home supply isn't there, I would suggest. We're active in Saudi from a programmatic out-of-home perspective. Very few, if any, other media owners are. So if there's some other media owners on the call, maybe get involved. Once that happens, once we hit that critical mass, I have no doubt that the Saudi market will explode for a variety of reasons, being investment from other markets, the growth and dynamism of that particular market as well. And then kind of grouping the rest together a little bit unfairly, it's a bit of a mixed bag. You see pockets depending on vertical, depending on kind of brand type, and depending on seasonality. But definitely leading the charge, UAE, Saudi catching up massively, and the rest perhaps a bit more sporadic.
Thanks, Dom. And Fash, are you seeing a similar trend from a buying perspective or a planning and optimization perspective as well?
Yeah, pretty much. I would say I completely agree with Dom. I think the UAE really sets the pace on this one. If you think of it, I think there's certain nuances in our region as well, which need to be taken into consideration. We've got a country like the UAE, right, which is maybe just for the UK audience, like a third of the size of the UAE with about 12 million population. But it's very concentrated with screens, and we have those nuances are like the heavy mall culture, the fact that we have a public transport network which is ever expanding, and they have very ambitious plans as that progresses. And then from a programmatic infrastructure, it's definitely ahead of the game on that side as well in terms of being the most developed. But to Dom's point, in terms of Saudi, I think that's where it gets really, really interesting. Now you've got a country which is around 9 times the size of the UK with a 40 million population and existing screens that are just waiting to be kind of switched on programmatically, right? So they already have quite a big network of screens out there. It's just not, exactly to Dom's point, not programmatically enabled. And I think once they do, what you'll see is Saudi kind of leapfrogs to a certain degree and actually takes over in terms of being the leading market from a programmatic digital out of home. It's just a matter of time.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting perspective. Thank you both. The reports and the data associated, excuse me, Adam touched on earlier about when this data was compiled. And obviously there's huge uncertainty in the region, sadly, that's affecting everybody sort of in the room on the call, obviously. I guess rather than just look at forecasts and figures, I'd really like to hear from you all about how you're trying your best to maintain client confidence, obviously, in this really challenging time. Is that possible? How do you kind of maintain dialogue with customers? Obviously, we're facing some critical challenges that are hugely significant, but obviously, from what we're all trying to do, there's ongoing discussions with partners to have. So, Eamon, maybe I can come to you first. Is it even possible to maintain partnerships and relationships, and how do you go about that at the moment, please?
Yeah, I mean, we put a big effort into just that, reaching out to our clients. Look, there's only so much you can do to affect people's, confidence and perception, and everybody reacts to a situation like this very differently. But we put a lot of effort into just reaching out to our clients and just emphasizing, that our network is still here, it's viable, our audiences are still here. It's a time where we really similar to COVID, when everybody very quickly went to a remote work from home status, we then were able to really leverage our residential network. We have a huge residential network of elevators and lobbies throughout Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And we saw with our data that residential footfall wasn't that much affected. There was a slight dip because obviously there was people that left the region entirely. But our residential network footfall and impression volume was still quite robust. We only saw, around 10 to 12% dip. So we were able to really lean into the residential network because most brands, most companies, businesses know, after the first week or two is a bit of a shock. But after that, most companies and brands certainly know they got to get their message back out. They got to reach out to their audiences. They got to continue to acquire new customers. And a residential network in a time like that is a very strong proposition. So we leaned into that. We emphasized that. And it's kind of been the focus for the last few weeks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, really interesting perspective and agreed about kind of re-engaging and talking in a manner that you can. And obviously, brands want to talk and engage with their consumers all the time. It's finding the right means to do so. Dom, is that the same at JCDecaux in terms of partnership and ongoing interaction at the moment?
Yeah, I would say so. Certainly in the local market. Obviously, we've had a slightly different impact with our heavy airports portfolio, as you would expect. But I think the local market gets it, right? Brands are back. They know they need to stay on. They know they need to keep communicating. We are still perceiving internationally maybe a bit of a perception challenge in that. You see the news, God forbid you watch the BBC, and perhaps internationally some of that investment has kind of slowed down, those conversations have slowed down. But it is a perception challenge, right? To Eamon's point, the audience is still here. That affluent Middle East audience is still going about their day-to-day business, still spending, still looking for where to spend the consumer dollars, the consumer dirham. If you want to deep dive into that, shameless plug, go read the article that I wrote for News Digital Age published yesterday and go into that in great depth, which I won't do today. But I think what's really interesting is if you actually take it to the next level, and I think Eamon mentioned COVID, and that we saw something really interesting in COVID from a programmatic out of home standpoint, was that as the market came back, and this market will come back and is coming back incredibly quickly, it's the nature of things here. Programmatic out of home starts to take on a new meaning. It starts to be a channel to de-risk those first media strategies. The guys, Yasmin and Thomas earlier talked about the trading types and that kind of non-guaranteed trading model. The flexibility offered by programmatic out of home to de-risk your media campaign, I think, is something that will actually accelerate programmatic out of home within the region in the short term.
Yeah, it's an interesting point on the COVID sort of example. Obviously a very different time, and to your point, consumers are still going about everyday behavior now versus obviously times of lockdown. So absolutely very different times. And back to Eamon's point, brands want to communicate and need to communicate, and out of home is obviously a brilliant channel to do that. Fash, same question to you. You seeing any similarities or differences in how Trade Desk is operating at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of like a personal and a professional answer, I would say, because look, there's no denying the last couple of months has been tricky for all of us. It's for some of us, it's the first time going through something like this in the region. But I think that, everyone, the industry, the country, everyone handled it incredibly well. But what it kind of zoned in on was the fact that the most difficult part was actually being able to make the right decisions, both personally and professionally, to be honest with you. So what that highlighted was, well, Trade Desk sits at this very interesting junction in the sense of having this ability to see everything that's happening across every channel. And then our role really just became supporting a lot of our clients by giving them accurate and real-time data and insights from our point of view to make sure, again, that they can make the right decisions at the right time for what's best for their company. And I think being an independent DSP, we don't manage any of the inventory ourselves. We don't manage anything on either side. We just make sure that we provide the infrastructure for activity to take place. I think that was really our ability to build those relationships. And I think that the one thing that we can't ignore is that MENA generally, historically, has always had a perception as a relationship-driven market. Although that's obviously changing over time, I think that we can't avoid the fact that relationships did drive a lot of what we saw in the last couple of months. People were WhatsApping and making sure that, everyone's safe and everyone's good, and make sure that, if you got everything you need, is there anything I can help you with? And I think it's at times like this where the relationship goes a long, long way. And actually, I was on a panel the other day and someone said something which I, thought was really, really interesting, which was, the relationships get you through the door a lot of the times, but the data is what keeps you there. And I think that we're at a stage right now where that couldn't be more true, in the sense of making sure that your value is proven, not just because you have a relationship with someone, but also because you're providing valuable data that they can make smart decisions on. Great, thank you. Totally agreed on the data points throughout everything that we do.
Let's look a little bit more ahead and maybe a little more positively. JCDecaux inventory and Elevision's inventory is quite different. And looking ahead, I think a supply question, please, gentlemen. What's the biggest opportunity in programmatic this year out of home? We've heard earlier panelists talk about many of the areas of opportunity, from measurement to DCO to data, etc. But maybe if I can come to you first, Eamon, what's the biggest opportunity you see this year from a programmatic point of view?
I would, we're making a big emphasis, a big push this year on really going deeper into our premium audiences. We had a big focus the last few years on the scale piece, and we scaled up the network quite a bit from kind of 2022 onwards. And now we're really going, putting just again a bigger emphasis on the premium nature of our audiences. So we're deepening our partnerships with a lot of our premium partners like DIFC, Dubai Holding, Eamon, D3, these types of locations with those really affluent premium audiences that advertisers want. And once we layer that onto the scale element of things, we can start to generate a much more attractive programmatic proposition. We know that, somebody mentioned earlier about the supply side of things, the volume of supply, and it was a challenge in the early days when we were the only programmatic network available for the first couple of years. With a certain limit on impressions and scale, we couldn't really drive a lot of programmatic demand on our own. But as the different networks come online, JCDecaux and some of the other digital out-of-home owners coming online programmatically, all of a sudden the available supply goes up. And that's where a big opportunity is for us jointly across all of our colleagues across the industry. So we've been focusing on scale, and then going back into the premium nature of our audiences. We always like to kind of communicate that we can deliver reach and targeting, where with a lot of other networks you can get a lot of reach, but then your targeting parameters are going to have to loosen up to a certain degree. So we're trying to bundle those two together and communicate that to our clients. And then with the other network owners coming online programmatically, that's a big opportunity for all of us to just really create a more attractive proposition from a global perspective.
Yes, thank you. I think that reach topic absolutely front and center, and as is the premium kind of narrative. I think you're totally right on that, and the region is obviously fantastically well placed for both of those topics. Dom, anything you'd like to add from your perspective, opportunity-wise?
It's super interesting when you think about opportunity. I'd say, again, very, very similar to the Elevision team, but almost in the kind of other direction, if you like. Inherently, JCDecaux premium is kind of in our DNA, where it be premium locations, quality of screen, etc. But now, certainly with programmatic out of home, we're absolutely moving in that scale direction. With Play Plus as a brand, right? So historically, if you wanted to buy Abu Dhabi airport and Dubai airport, it's two separate teams. You deal with two different people. Programmatically, we are scaled across the region, one point of contact, one team for planning, one team for execution. So that scale really is the biggest opportunity. And I would actually take that out beyond JCDecaux, right? We're talking about programmatic out of home here alongside our kind of individual businesses. Think of that being able to transact, plan and activate that consumer journey, entering through the premium environment of the airport, going home to their community on a regional environment, Elevision screen, having a JCDecaux touch point along the way. That scale is now available for a single touch point. So it's not just about the scale of JCDecaux. Yeah, great, please come buy our screens, they're amazing. But it's about combining that and that opportunity that quickly, easily, and in a data-driven, measurable and accountable way. That's really the opportunity here.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We talked a little bit about the region and obviously the slight nuance across. If we can just go back to that point, some of the data that came out of the State of the Nation research shows that just over half activity of the activity is running in a kind of single country logic at about 52%. And it looks like Saudi, somewhat echoing the points earlier made, is most nationally weighted, with 55% of buyers only buying in that geo, while Qatar lends itself more into that regional logic, 47% at a national level and 33% in the regional basis. Obviously, lots going on in the region, lots of different nuances, as I said. Fash, maybe I can come to you first. Is there a real local nuance you see when it comes to planning and buying versus what is sort of happening maybe in other channels or other ways of working? Are you seeing that, or is that being driven by you? I'm kind of curious to see what the buy side is saying about that, please.
Yeah, I think that the reality is it comes down to two things, right? In the region, you have to remember that when we talk about MENA, which is usually kind of blocked together, it's a combination of like 19 countries, right? So there's a lot of them and they're kind of moving at a different pace. I think there's two key things. One is it's very client specific, right? There are certain clients, and you can see that, for example, in Qatar, right? Where you've got a very different global brand mix, much smaller market, loads of global brands. Whereas if you look at Saudi, we have a lot of very big local brands that pretty much operate only in Saudi. So their footprint is local and national just wouldn't make sense for them. So from a client perspective, it really is client by client. So that's quite specific. But then additionally, it's the same topic that we've been discussing. It's that the fragmented kind of like supply infrastructure that we've got as well. So there may be a need to be able to run more regional campaigns, but from an infrastructure point of view, it's just not there yet. And I think Yasmin kind of touched on this briefly on her panel as well, which I completely agree with, where she was saying, they're seeing that 34% number coming in, but a lot of those are running internationally, right? And why is that? It's because the infrastructure exists internationally and the perception of it exists outside, and we're still moving in that direction. But generally speaking, everything we're talking about, from my point of view, there's only upside, right? So it's moving in the right directions. And, a couple of topics, I don't know if we'll come onto them, but it was a part of your research around inventory curation in terms of how we actually normalize and create a consistent way of taxonomy and data measurement and kind of just wording and what we call things. Once that steps in, that touches again on the education point that we've briefly discussed in the market as well, which I think is absolutely crucial. But it's people like everyone you've had on these panels and these discussions, along with many, many of our peers who are all pushing in the same direction. And again, just to reiterate, there's only upside.
Agreed. Dom, anything to add from your side?
Look, I think general agreement, certainly on the upside, but general agreement on, it's the nature of brands and the way the teams are organized, which kind of drive this number. I think what isn't perhaps captured here, which is probably worth at least anecdotally kind of adding into the conversation, is that import investment coming from external markets. There, in terms of trends, we tend to see two things, right? One is the kind of homogenous gestalt planning of planning the Middle East or MENA as a region, in which case you'll get kind of someone spreading their budget or spreading their objectives across the region, or you will get that investment into specific hubs for a specific reason, things like events, so they'll be targeting Dubai or Doha or something like that. So that's kind of the two trends we see. I think the chart probably reflects the reality pretty well, but like Fash said, it's only upside from here.
Great, thank you. We've got time for a couple of last questions. One I'd like to centre on is around data, and obviously data enhancements, data becoming more prevalent in this channel. Data is obviously hugely important in all media planning and all channels. Right now, location-based targeting is rated as important by 60% of marketeers. And audience targeting is pretty similar. It's 58%. Obviously, a clear opportunity here for targeting to grow in general. 49% of marketers said that first-party data with audience signals was one of the highest sort of things that they wanted to look at in terms of activation for out of home. It makes sense. It adds value, it adds growth, it's more precision. Maybe I can ask the sort of supply side angle. Eamon, first, from your perspective, are you seeing location-based buying is still really prevalent? Is it helping? Is it adding value? Can you even talk a bit about your own data infrastructure and what you are trying to bring into that? We'd just love to know your opinion on that and how it's sort of going to enhance and grow and help with the trends we've talked a bit about.
Yeah, I mean, our network is very, kind of location-based. We have about 3,000 screens now in the UAE across, I think, about 750 locations. And we kind of group our network into sub-networks based on geographies, based on neighborhoods, downtown versus the Palm versus the Marina. And it has always been sold traditionally from a location perspective. You get certain audiences as a byproduct of that location, and that's still what's driving a lot of the planning and the decision making. But it was still a very location first orientation. We are, though, now with more data coming in and the variety of data partnerships that we have. We have partnerships with about now 4 different data vendors. Last year, we introduced like industry segments across our commercial network. So if you want to target, instead of just targeting the financial district, you can now or the commodities district, you can target consulting, legal, law firms, that buildings that index the highest across those segments that are split across the different geos. So we have that industry targeting available now. We're also now just unrolling the same, or about to release the same for our residential network with the audience segments. Luxury lifestyle, family lifestyle, fitness enthusiasts, that sort of segments where you can now we're mapping the network, indexing buildings against these different segments. So advertisers can target specific segments piercing the circuit structure and going after individual buildings or clustering them together for this audience-based targeting. But it's a lot of work because, you guys know, like all these audience signals, and to generate this data, you need certain sample sizes. And the deeper you drill, you start to sacrifice those sample sizes. So there's a push and pull to deliver the audiences with accuracy that are still actionable. But it is something that we're working on. It's definitely something that the buy side wants. And I think it's going to deliver a lot of kind of upside potential in general for ourselves, for our clients. And I think across the industry, we're going to see a lot more of it.
Yeah, and I love that point about actionable audiences. It's almost like, utilizing relevant data. Big data is one thing, but actionable data and actionable audiences is really important if we're going to kind of add precision. Dom, from your perspective, anything to add?
Look, I think location is a proxy for audience. It is, right? You live in a place, you go to a certain thing, the community around you will be similar in terms of affluence, etc. And particularly, I think within, speaking for the UAE as well as maybe the region, this is, if you compare it to say Europe, it is much more kind of community by community, area by area, zonal in terms of where people live and how they kind of go about their kind of daily lives, if you like. And I think we also have to remember that we are a one-to-many channel, right? We are you're always going to be reaching everyone who is seeing that screen. So actually that location and what it tells you about the audience, what it infers about the audience, perhaps is more important. I think the challenge that then sometimes gets presented is, what does that mean from a JCDecaux versus Elevision versus MMG kind of perspective? Where is that consistency? And I think once you start to get into kind of that more audience-based targeting, that is really where the likes of the DSPs, the likes of Fashion, the trade desk really come in. Where can you get that aggregated audience data set to apply across all media owners? I think that's really where the interesting direction of travel is.
I totally agree. I think that's where the excitement occurs. That's how other audiences, it's where other channels are planned and bought. You're right about the proxy. I think POI data is fantastic, but that socio-demographic data, overlaid is the next step, and is certainly, happening in this channel now. And that hopefully unlocks more buying potential into the channel. Last question. Let's close with, I guess, another data point. The report projects 42% increase in programmatic investment over the next 18 months. We've talked about bold numbers and statistics earlier. I'd love just to get an opinion from you all, please, on what's the single most important thing the industry needs to do differently to make that number, or hopefully a higher number, a reality. And maybe, Fash, I could start with you this time, please.
Sure. This definitely ties into the conversation around data. So from my point of view, I think just to kind of set the stage. So from a general region point of view, when it comes to data, we're actually a very, very data rich market. So if we look at the telcos, the retail partners we have, the loyalty programs, the e-commerce, etc., all the data exists. It just currently kind of sits in silos, and it's rarely activated the way it should be, or the way you might see in the UK or the US. But what it trickles down to is the fact that we know certain things are coming in the region. For example, we talked about the supply growth. Like, Gavin, if we had this conversation in a year's time, I can pretty much assure you that the number of screens in the region would have doubled by that time, right? So from a supply point of view, it's incredible, and it's growing, and we're all here for it, right? But the reality is, how do we stitch this together from a user journey point of view? To Dom's point, so we need certain things to be activated, and we all need to push in the right direction so that we can actually be able to reach that audience from an omnichannel point of view in every stage of their journey. So, for example, if we know for a fact that Eamon's screens are going to be hitting, all the individuals, whether it's in a residential building or if it's in their office blocks or whatever it may be, and I know that I can reach Dom's audiences through Dom's screens when they're at the airports, or the extended reach across the country as well. But the reality is that that's not enough, right? So realistically, I know that the user's driving from Sheikh Zayed Road. He's going to be stopping at his office, which is in this location. He's probably listening to a podcast on the way to work. He sees the screen on his way to work, and then later on he's checking the football scores on a website. And that's really where the power of omnichannel comes in, when you do have a strong enough data framework in place. That is one of the key missing pieces, in my opinion, and that's something. For example, Trade Desk, where obviously you're familiar with UID and EUID frameworks that we have in Europe and the US. And that's something that we're actively pushing for, to make sure that there is an identity framework in place which actually stitches all this first-party data together and make sure that we understand the audience well enough to be able to tell the story and reach them at each part of their journey, which is, fishing with a rod, which, you know what the user likes and what bait they like and exactly where they're going to be in that location. I think that's really where the success cases out of that, of partnering with supply partners like Eamon and Dom and many others, to show that this is possible, this is how you do it, and the infrastructure from a tech point of view currently exists. I think that's when it gets really, really exciting, and then you're going to see a massive spike in uptake.
Great, yeah, I totally agree. Keep the consumer front and center, make media constantly relevant, totally aligned with that sort of thinking and DNA running through the channel as it does in others. Eamon, comments from you, please?
About the one single thing, is that the question?
Yeah, sorry, the question was one single thing that's going to make the 42% a reality, or hopefully we'll see a superior figure.
I guess it's kind of similar, but alongside the data piece that Fash mentioned is measurement, and not in terms of like performance and attribution, but reach, impressions, frequency. I mean, really, impressions is a real underlying currency of what we're doing. And I just think a unified protocols, unified standards, unified kind of expectations that clients can expect. Because I do think that it's not unified how everybody measures their traffic and whatnot, and I think it's an area that we have to improve on and get some consensus and some I wouldn't say oversight, but just some general consensus and some standardization in that area to really put our best foot forward, to give like partners like the trade desk or partnerships on the DSP side ultimately to the clients to give that confidence, stability, and consistency across the different networks.
Brilliant, thank you. And Dom?
Well, Gavin, you won't be surprised. I'm going to be slightly controversial with this one. So first off, that 42% number in 18 months, if we have only grown 42% in 18 months in this region, that's a failure. That is absolutely a failure. We will easily exceed that number, even with the current political situation. I will bet, pounds to pennies on that, no problem whatsoever. What he's doing, I'll address it to two specific audiences. Right, we've seen early on the panels today, we've seen WPP as a group talking about some of the great omni-channel work they're doing. That does not exist everywhere in the Middle East. Agencies are running at very, very different speeds, and agencies need to pick up their omni-channel skills in the region in terms of the tools they're using, in terms of their planning, their activation, and their measurement and attribution. They are beholden to the brands, right? That is their role in the ecosystem, and it is not consistent. So that needs to be picked up. And then if you're a brand, you need to be challenging your agency. If programmatic digital out of home isn't part of your omni-channel plan, or if you don't have an omni-channel plan with an appropriate measurement framework attached to it, you need to be asking your agency why. So those two things will make that number go from 42% into the hundreds, no problem.
I think just on the back of that, Dom, if you don't mind me tagging on to that one as well, Gavin. I think this is the key thing. If you notice, we talk a lot about omni-channel, but there's a lot of content around multi-channel, right? So we just kind of have to make it clear that those are two different things. In my head, in my experience, multi-channel still operates very much in silos, and omni-channel is really where you unleash the power of programmatic and the omni-channel DSPs that exist today. So that's one thing that we need to shift towards, is more omni-channel as well.
Brilliant, thank you. There are lots of questions. I think we're at time, sadly, so we're not going to have time to go to them. I think what we'll do is try and cover them off maybe after the event, because it's brilliant that people have submitted some thoughts and comments. First, thank you to the three of you. Thank you, Fash. Thank you, Eamon. Thank you, Dom, for a really open, constructive panel. Thank you to Yasmin. Thank you to Thomas. Thank you to Leon for their earlier assistance and thoughts on their panels. Thank you to our hosts here as well, and fellow kind of hosts that have joined me today on stage. Thank you, Zoo. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Jem, for your input. And thank you to the VIOOH marketing team as well for putting on a great event today. Hopefully it's been a really useful day and session for those that have managed to dial in. You can see on screen a QR code to allow you to download the report. You can also go to the VIOOH website where you can download not just the State of the Nation report for the Middle East, but also the other markets that we talked about earlier. So please do go on there and download those reports. We'd encourage you to have a read. Obviously, there's lots of data in there. Some of it will be more important for you and will help you in your kind of growth and your aspirations in the region. The great thing about these events is we really try and facilitate and nurture collaboration. So yes, this isn't an in-person event, but hopefully you've seen some new names on panels today. You can reach out to people. Hopefully we can facilitate a growing ecosystem and you can spend time with each other. If you want to reach out to VIOOH directly, hello@viooh.com is a great email address. We can capture those questions, thoughts, and we can hopefully help you on your journey within the programmatic ecosystem evolution in the region. Thanks again for joining today. We hope you found it useful. That's it from us all here at VIOOH. Thanks again, and hopefully you enjoy reading the reports in more detail. Thank you.